Dear ladies and gentlemen, a couple days ago we were talking about Russian missile attack on Poland, a NATO member country. We also noticed that reaction of NATO headquarters in Brussels was not only slow, but it was kind of weak. Maybe so, maybe not exactly so. What do I mean here? I mean here that there is an opinion that could be sort of a smart reaction of the so-called civilized societies that would like to apply the tradition of using barbarians to fight the wars on their behalf. Well, ancient Rome used to apply this method, and as a result, of course, the great Rome fell, collapsed. Why so? Because at first the barbarian armies were fighting on behalf of Rome. Then the officers and generals became barbarians as well. And then finally, the barbarians became the emperors of Rome, and everything fell apart. But let's forget Rome. Let's switch to our civilization. Well, when England and France were fighting for North American colonies, to be more specific, for Eastern Canada and for eastern states of the contemporary United States of America, who were fighting on behalf of those two powers? Well, French soldiers were there and British soldiers were there as well, and officers too, but predominantly the warriors were the aboriginals, the natives, the so-called barbarians. For example, the Hurons were fighting for France and the Delawares and Mohicans for the British. And the British finally won the war, you know. Then, even if we look at the US War of Independence, you probably know that there were thousands of German mercenaries there. In fact, those soldiers were not mercenaries at all, because all the money that were paid for their service and for their lives was put in the pocket of the princes and kings of smaller German princely states and smaller German kingdoms. There were about 300 smaller German states those days. And the poor German soldiers from Hessen and other smaller states were in fact slave soldiers. They were getting some money, but very little. That was another example. In this case, the barbarians were those poor Germans from Hessen and not only from there. By the way, I completely forgot about the more or less famous in Eastern Europe battle on ice. It occurred in the middle of the 13th century, and it was a battle during which the Russians reportedly defeated German knights of Livonian order, or the Brothers of Sword to be more specific. In fact, who was fighting there? On the German side, those were Latvians, Estonians, and Wotyaks. And there were a few German officers and a few German knights. But again, predominantly, those were the so-called barbarians. Estonians, Latvians, and Wotyaks. From the Russian side, by the way, there were also some non-Russian tribes. But that's another topic. Then we can look at the First World War. Despite the fact that the Russian Empire also had her own interests in that war, millions of Russian soldiers were used to actually fight for the interests of the British Crown, for the interests of the Free France, and actually that's it. The Eastern Front and the Middle Eastern Front were those places where millions of Russian lives were sacrificed because the West preferred to use the lives of those dirty, filthy Russian barbarians. And by the way, during the Second World War, the approach was pretty much the same. That's why when finally two aggressors, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, clashed, the Western allies were very slow with opening the Second Front. They were giving money, they were giving weapons, airplanes and tanks to the Soviets, and they were using the Soviet barbarian soldiers as the cannon fodder. for their interests predominantly. That's why there is an opinion that probably NATO is looking at the Russian-Ukrainian war from the same perspective. They would prefer the barbarians, in this case Ukrainians, to fight against other barbarians, in this case Russians, for some more advanced interests. And of course, Ukraine will get more weapons, Ukraine will get more money, and definitely Ukraine will win. I'm not sure whether this approach is really used by contemporary NATO headquarters, but that opinion exists. And if this is the case, it's not very good. Because in the short term, this method is quite effective. In the long term, not at all. And the result could be really bad. Remember the great Roman Empire and its fall. That's all I wanted to say today. All the best. Bye-bye.